would you do if the child you loved, the child you raised as your own for over a decade, wasn't biologically yours? This is the devastating reality for countless men in America today, caught in a web of deception and betrayal that can shatter their entire world. We're talking about paternity fraud, a profound violation of trust where a mother knowingly or unknowingly deceives a man into believing he is the father of her child. Imagine pouring your heart, your finances, your very identity into a family built on a lie. That was the life of David Miller, a father of two, until a routine medical checkup and an unexpected blood test blew his reality apart. The courts are now grappling with these cases, but for the men involved, it's not just a legal battle. It's an emotional implosion. This is their story. The quiet anguish behind the statistics, the moment their world turned upside down. The late afternoon sun, usually a warm balm on David Miller's weary shoulders, felt more like a spotlight, casting long, accusatory shadows across the familiar landscape of his backyard. He sat on the worn wooden bench, the same one where he'd watched Chloe take her first wobbly steps, the same one where they'd shared countless ice cream cones on sweltering summer days. His hands, calloused from years of dedicated work, traced the grain of the wood, a familiar comfort now tinged with a chilling unease. It had started subtly, a misplaced document, an offhand comment from a well-meaning relative, a nagging, persistent feeling that something was fundamentally askew. The results of the DNA test, tucked away in a drawer he hadn't been able to bring himself to open again, lay like a coiled viper in the quiet house. He replayed the moment he saw them, the stark, clinical words, confirming what his gut had screamed for months. Sarah, his wife of nearly 2 decades, the woman he thought he knew better than himself, had built their life on a foundation of sand. The implications washed over him in cold, suffocating waves. Chloe, his vibrant, laughing Chloe, with her boundless energy and her uncanny resemblance to his own mother's side of the family, wasn't his. The air, thick with the scent of mown grass and blooming jasmine, suddenly felt suffocating. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, seemed amplified, mocking the deafening silence within him. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure the image of Sarah's face, the easy smile, the shared jokes, the intimate whispers in the dark. Was it all a lie? Every kiss, every argument, every shared dream? The betrayal was a physical ache, a hollow space in his chest where his heart used to beat with unwavering certainty. He opened his eyes, his gaze falling on Chloe's abandoned bicycle leaning against the fence, its bright pink frame a stark contrast to the gray dread that had settled over him. The laughter he associated with that bike, with his daughter, felt distant, like a memory from another life. He stood up, his knees stiff, and walked towards the house, each step a heavy, deliberate act against the current of his own unraveling reality. Sarah Jenkins stood by the kitchen window, a ceramic mug of lukewarm tea clutched in her slender hands, and the condensation on the glass mirrored the anxiety that perpetually fogged her own internal landscape. Outside, the familiar sight of David tending to his roses, his broad back a picture of quiet diligence, felt like a scene from a play she had been performing for nearly 20 years. The DNA test results, the single, damning piece of paper that had shattered her carefully constructed world, lay hidden beneath a stack of mail on the counter, a constant, silent accusation. Each day since that fateful phone call, since the sterile voice on the other end confirmed the unthinkable, had been an exercise in controlled panic. She'd seen the change in David, the subtle withdrawal, the haunted look in his eyes that she couldn't bear to meet. He was a good man, a devoted husband, a doting father. He had poured his heart and soul into their family, and never once suspecting the seismic shift beneath their feet. Her affair with Mark, a whirlwind of misguided passion during a period of marital strain, had been a terrible mistake, a lapse in judgment she had regretted almost immediately. But then came Chloe, a vibrant, undeniable consequence, and with her, a new resolve to make their family whole, albeit on a carefully guarded falsehood. She had convinced herself for years that the secret was a necessary evil, a sacrifice for the greater good of Chloe's happiness and the preservation of their family unit. Now, that justification felt as hollow as a drum. The fear was a physical presence, tightening its grip around her chest. What would happen when David fully understood? What would happen to Chloe, to the girl who adored her father, who saw him as her unwavering rock? Sarah's mind raced. He was cycling through worst-case scenarios, each more devastating than the last. She pictured David's heartbroken face, Chloe's confusion and pain, the potential implosion of everything she had fought so hard to maintain. The polite smiles and casual conversations with neighbors now felt like a tightrope walk over an abyss. She smoothed down her professional blouse, a futile attempt to regain a semblance of composure. The weight of the secret was crushing, a constant heavy burden that threatened to break her. She took a shaky sip of her tea, the bitter taste a fitting reflection of her own despair. Chloe Miller sat hunched on her bed, her long dark hair falling like a curtain around her face, obscuring the turmoil in her hazel eyes. The room, usually a vibrant reflection of her teenage world, posters of her favorite bands, and a scattered art supplies, a pile of trendy clothes, felt alien, a stage set for a drama she hadn't auditioned for. The words echoed in her mind, a relentless, disorienting loop, not biologically his. It was a concept so foreign, so shattering, that her young mind struggled to grasp its full weight. David, her dad, the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who patiently helped with her homework, whose booming laugh could always lift her spirits, the man she loved unconditionally, the man whose life and love had always been her constant. Suddenly, that constancy was a phantom. A profound sense of disorientation washed over her, leaving her feeling adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Who was she, if not David Miller's daughter? Every memory, every cherished moment seemed to be recontextualized, tinged with a disquieting new meaning. Now was her entire childhood a meticulously crafted illusion? The question swirled, sharp and painful, threatening to tear her apart. She looked at her hands, the same hands David often held when they crossed busy streets, and wondered whose hands they truly belonged to. She traced the curve of her jaw in the reflection of her vanity mirror, searching for a glimpse of a stranger, a hint of a truth she couldn't yet comprehend. The vibrant colors of her room seemed to dim, the energy of her youth overshadowed by a sudden, premature burden of existential doubt. Her athletic build, once a source of pride during soccer games, now felt like just a collection of borrowed parts. The exuberance that characterized her usual demeanor was replaced by a heavy, bewildered silence. She felt a tightness in her chest, a nascent grief for the father she thought she knew, for the identity she had always taken for granted. It was as if a vital thread in the tapestry of her being had been abruptly cut, leaving her to dangle precariously, unsure of where she belonged or who she truly was. The teenage dreams of college and future adventures seemed distant, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming need to understand the ground upon which her very existence was built. She picked up a framed photo of her and David at her recent 18th birthday party, his arms slung proudly around her shoulders, his smile wide and genuine. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek, a testament to the raw, unraveling pain within. Mark Peterson poured himself another glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly in the expensive crystal. From his vantage point on the penthouse balcony, the city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds, a testament to a world of success and ambition he had meticulously cultivated. His short-cropped dark hair, now showing distinguished streaks of gray at the temples, caught the ambient light as he turned his head. He was a man who exuded confidence, a sharp, almost predatory energy that had served him well in his career. For years, Chloe had been a ghost in his peripheral vision, a secret he acknowledged but never truly engaged with. He had known Sarah's secret, the intimate details of her affair, the fact that the child she carried was his. There had been a time early on when the possibility of a life with Sarah, with their child, had flickered. But the risks, the potential fallout from his own life, had been too great, and he had retreated, opting for a distant, almost spectral acknowledgement of his paternal role. He had watched from afar as David raised Chloe, a silent observer of a life he had helped create but never claimed. The news of David's discovery, whispered through mutual acquaintances, had reached him a few weeks prior. It stirred a complex cocktail of emotions, a pang of guilt, a flicker of regret, and an undeniable, almost primal curiosity. He found himself replaying old conversations with Sarah, dissecting her anxieties, her justifications. He thought of Chloe, the young woman she was becoming, a person he had only seen in fleeting photographs. He had always told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting his own life, ensuring his professional standing. But now, standing alone amidst the glittering cityscape, a different narrative began to emerge. Was he a coward? Had he abdicated a fundamental responsibility out of self-preservation? The confident demeanor he usually projected wavered, replaced by a contemplative, almost somber expression. He took a slow sip of his drink, the warmth spreading through him, doing little to dissipate the chill of introspection. He wondered about David, the man whose life had been built on a lie he never knew he was living. He wondered about Chloe, the daughter he had never truly known. The distant echo of their lives, once easily ignored, was growing louder, demanding his attention, forcing him to confront the choices he had made and the potential consequences that were now, inevitably, rippling outwards. The air in the living room crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable force that seemed to press in from all sides. David Miller stood facing Sarah Jenkins, the space between them a chasm, carved by nearly 2 decades of shared life and one devastating revelation. His usual easygoing posture was replaced by a rigid, almost defensive stance, his hands clenched at his sides. The worry lines etched around his eyes now seemed like deep furrows of pain and disbelief. He had spent the day wrestling with the raw, ragged edges of his emotions, the initial shock giving way to a burning need for answers, for the truth, however agonizing it might be. He looked at Sarah, at her kind but tired eyes, the familiar face that had been the center of his universe, and saw a stranger. The betrayal was a bitter pill, coating his tongue with the taste of ashes. "How long, Sarah?" His voice, usually warm and steady, was rough, strained, barely above a whisper. He needed to hear it from her, to see the confirmation in her eyes, even though he already knew the answer. He watched as her slender frame tensed, the subtle anxiety he had always sensed in her, now manifesting as a visible tremor. She averted her gaze, her shoulder-length blonde hair falling forward, obscuring her face. "David, I—" Her voice faltered, the professional facade she usually maintained crumbling under the weight of his direct gaze. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a hammer blow against David's fractured reality. He saw Chloe then, hovering in the doorway of the living room, her expressive hazel eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and confusion, her youthful exuberance replaced by a profound, unsettling maturity. She was caught in the crossfire, a pawn in a game whose rules had just been irrevocably rewritten. The sight of her, so vulnerable, so unaware of the full extent of the seismic shift occurring around her, sent a fresh wave of protective anger and sorrow through him. This wasn't just about him and Sarah anymore. It was about Chloe, about the foundation of her entire life. He took a deep, shaky breath, steeling himself for the difficult conversations that lay ahead, the painful unraveling of everything they had built, the terrifying uncertainty of what would come next. The shadow of confrontation loomed large, threatening to engulf them all. The familiar scent of brewing coffee did little to calm David's nerves as he stood in his old kitchen, the one he and Sarah had renovated together years ago. Sarah Jenkins, his ex-wife, stood by the counter, her usual composure strained. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, but her eyes, normally kind, held a flicker of panic. She wore a simple, practical blouse and slacks, attire that did nothing to disguise the tension radiating from her. He laid the doctor's report on the worn Formica table between them, The stark white paper a jarring interruption to the domestic scene. "This," David said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. "What is this, Sarah?" Sarah looked at the paper, then at David, her face paling. She avoided his gaze, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee mug. "David, I can explain." But even as she spoke, David knew the explanation would be a cascade of pain. He pressed on, the raw hurt fueling his need for truth. 18 years, Sarah. 18 years I've believed Chloe was mine. 18 years I've loved her, raised her. Who is he? Sarah finally met his eyes, and in them, he saw a reflection of his own devastation, mixed with a deep, crippling fear. Tears welled up, blurring her vision. It was a mistake. A long time ago. Mark, he was just... She trailed off, unable to articulate the years of betrayal. David felt a cold rage begin to replace the shock. Every memory, every sacrifice, every moment of fatherly pride now felt tainted. The foundation of their shared life, the very bedrock of his identity, had been a lie constructed by her. He looked at her, not with the love he once had, but with a profound sense of loss for the man he thought he was and the family he believed he had. Chloe Miller, 18, had always considered herself a daddy's girl. Her world revolved around her father's quiet strength and unwavering support. But the hushed, strained conversations between her parents in the weeks following David's discovery were impossible to ignore. She saw the way her mother avoided her gaze, the new, haunted look in her father's eyes. One evening, the dam finally broke. David, his voice heavy with a sorrow that seemed to age him overnight, sat Chloe down in the living room. The air was thick with unspoken truths. He explained haltingly about the DNA test, the results, the devastating revelation that the man she called Dad, the man who had taught her to ride a bike and cheered loudest at her soccer games, was not her biological father. Chloe listened, her initial confusion morphing into disbelief, then a wave of nausea. Now her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the father she knew with this new, seismic truth. She looked at David, seeing not just the man who raised her, but a stranger wrestling with his own pain. Then her thoughts turned to her mother, the years of smiles and reassurances now seeming like a carefully constructed facade. Who was she? The questions bombarded her. Was her entire identity a fabrication? Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging, not just for the loss of what she thought was real, but for the pain etched on her father's face and the silent betrayal from her mother. The comfortable familiarity of her home now felt like a foreign land. The polished mahogany desk in the lawyer's office offered no comfort. David Miller, his usual dependable demeanor replaced by a visible weariness, sat across from Ms. Anya Sharma, a sharp attorney whose expression conveyed professional sympathy, but also the gravity of his situation. David recounted the story again, the 18 years of unwavering fatherhood, the devastating DNA results, Sarah's confession. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built countless toys, fixed countless bikes, and held his daughter close. "I raised her," David stated, his voice thick with emotion. "She is my daughter. That's all that matters, isn't it? This Mark, I don't even know him." Ms. Sharma listened intently, her brow furrowed. "David," she began gently, "legally, it's complicated. Paternity fraud is a serious issue, but your rights and responsibilities, and Chloe's, are complex, especially after so long. We need to understand Mark Peterson's involvement, his awareness, and his intentions." The word fraud hung in the air, a bitter accusation that stung more than any physical blow. He wasn't a victim of fraud. He was a man who had loved a child who wasn't biologically his, a love he now feared was built on a lie. The idea of legal battles, of courts dissecting his fatherhood, felt deeply invasive and wrong. He just wanted his daughter, the daughter he knew and loved, but the world outside his home was demanding a definition of fatherhood that felt alien and cold. He knew he had to fight for Chloe, but the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal jargon and emotional landmines. Mark Peterson, a man who had unwittingly remained a ghost in David and Sarah's lives for 18 years, began to surface. He was a former colleague of Sarah's, a man with an athletic build and a confident, almost imposing presence. He had known about Chloe's existence for years, a quiet observer of the life he had indirectly shaped. Now, with the truth unraveling, his presence became more tangible. David learned that Mark had recently reached out to Sarah, perhaps sensing a shift, or perhaps driven by his own conscience or curiosity. David pictured him, sharp features, dark hair hinting at gray, a stark contrast to his own weathered hands and worry lines. Mark represented not just a biological connection, but a threat to the father-daughter bond David had meticulously nurtured. Was Mark seeking a role? Was he unaware of the depth of David's love for Chloe? Or was he merely a specter of Sarah's past, now casting a long shadow over David's future? The uncertainty gnawed at David. This man, a stranger, held a biological claim, a piece of Chloe that David couldn't claim through blood, but could claim through 18 years of unwavering devotion. The thought of Mark Peterson entering Chloe's life, potentially displacing him in her eyes, was a source of deep anxiety. David's fight was no longer just about confronting Sarah. It was about protecting his place as Chloe's father from a biological rival he'd never known existed. David sat in his workshop, the familiar scent of oil and metal a temporary balm to his fractured soul. Tools lay scattered on the workbench, remnants of projects he'd started but couldn't finish since the revelation. He picked up a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a gift Chloe had made for him years ago, her small hands clumsy but earnest. He traced the rough edges, his heart aching. Blood. Now it was a word that had suddenly taken on immense weight, a biological imperative he had always unknowingly fulfilled, but now, with terrifying clarity, did not possess. Yet, holding the bird, he felt the undeniable truth. Chloe was his daughter. Not by the threads of DNA, but by the tapestry of shared moments, of scraped knees kissed better, of bedtime stories read with a soothing voice, of every proud cheer from the sidelines. He remembered the panic in her eyes when he'd first told her, the way she'd clung to him, seeking reassurance that he was still her father, regardless of biology. That was the definition that mattered. The legalities, the potential involvement of Mark Peterson. They were external forces attempting to redefine a bond forged in love and sacrifice. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Now, there would be difficult conversations, lingering questions, and the constant presence of doubt. But looking at the wooden bird, David found a flicker of resolve. His fatherhood wasn't determined by a test result. It was earned, day by day, year by year. He would fight for that definition, for his daughter, for the man he had become through her. The diner booth felt both intimate and exposed. David and Chloe sat opposite each other, the remains of their meal scattered between them. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a quiet, somber understanding, but the future loomed vast and uncertain. Chloe stirred her untouched iced tea, her gaze fixed on the condensation trickling down the glass. "Dad," she began, her voice wavering, even if he's my real father, you're still my dad, right?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 18 years of love and the painful uncertainty of what was to come. David reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was firm, grounding. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his heart, "blood doesn't make a father. Love does. Time does. Showing up does. I've been showing up for you for 18 years, and I'm not stopping now. Whatever happens, whatever the lawyers say, whatever Mark wants, you are my daughter. Always." He met her eyes, pouring all his conviction into his gaze. Chloe finally looked up, a flicker of relief, mingled with a lingering sadness, softening her features. She squeezed his hand. The path ahead was still shrouded in questions. About Sarah, about Mark, about the legal battles to come. But in that moment, a fragile bridge was being built. One based not on biology, but on an enduring, unshakable paternal love. The world had changed dramatically, but the core of their relationship, the essence of David's fatherhood, remained steadfast. If you happened to be in David's shoes, what would you have done? Anything better? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Let's know if his actions were wrong or right. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. See you in the next one.